I'm Alex Michelson. This week, the issues are California Democrats and crime. Governor Newsom trying to create some distance between himself and some legislators. Plus, Donald Trump's continued dominance over the Republican field. Can anything stop him? On our panel this week, Dan Schnur and Brian Goldsmith. Plus, we talk about the Hollywood on strike with Variety's Elizabeth Wagmeister. Talk about the actors and writers being out at the same time. Plus, we profile Super Bowl champ Juju Smith-Schuster back home in California this week, paying it forward. The Issue Is starts right now.
Broadcasting across California, you're watching The Issue Is.
And welcome to The Issue Is. I'm Alex Michelson. Look at this panel. Two of the smartest guys that I know who dressed exactly the same.
You made us dress this way.
Yeah. Literally, these are the guys that teach me about politics, and so let's meet them. Dan Schnur worked on 4 presidential campaigns, 3 campaigns for governor, ran for office himself as a nonpartisan. He teaches politics at UC Berkeley, USC, and Pepperdine, and is one of my favorite professors of all time. Brian Goldsmith is a political analyst and consultant who has helped the likes of Pete Buttigieg. Before that, he was a journalist who produced Katie Couric's most consequential political interviews. Dan and Brian, welcome back to The Issue Is. Great to see both of you. A lot to talk about this week. And let's start by discussing the impact of crime in California and how it impacts politics here. This month, Vanity Fair has quite an article out. It's called, "Can Anyone Fix California?" And among the people they interviewed was former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who says this. Let's put it up on the screen. The biggest challenge to California, she says, is safety. She goes on to say, whether you want to call it homelessness or drug use or whatever it is, safety is the oath we take to protect and defend, yes, the Constitution, but the people. Speaking of safety, this week, Manson follower Leslie Van Houten left prison on parole for her role in a murder more than a century ago. Governor Newsom okayed that release. And then there was this, Democrats in the Assembly's Public Safety Committee stopping a bill that would have made sure that people convicted of child sex trafficking could not get out early. The bill had originally passed the state Senate unanimously. There was such a brouhaha after this, Governor Newsom actually intervened to bring the bill back. Eventually, they got this thing through, but it was ugly and not great politics. Is this a vulnerable issue for Democrats? And is Nancy Pelosi framing this right when she says it's about safety?
Well, that's exactly right. Crime really came roaring back as an issue this decade. It cost the Democratic Party probably 12 to 14 House seats in 2020. It cost the Democrats the House itself in the 22 cycle, especially in 2 big blue states, California and New York. There are about a dozen Biden districts that are now represented by Republican members of Congress, and that alone is more than double Kevin McCarthy's margin. So Democrats have got to go right at this issue. They've got to fix this issue. And anytime the word or phrase child sex trafficking is anywhere near the Democratic Party, that is a big problem.
Yeah, and meanwhile, it's interesting to see what Governor Newsom did on this. Here's what he said after this thing was essentially yanked. He backed the Republican, Shannon Grove, over Democrats. Take a listen.
I talked to Senator Grove about it this morning, which is indicative of my desire to see what we can do.
Newsom, like Pelosi, recognizes that crime is an issue that could really hurt the Democrats. And this committee, which earlier this year actually voted to determine that sexual violence was not a violent crime in California, Newsom understands he can't leave his flank exposed on this, which is why he's pushing back so hard.
Yeah. Let's talk about another big issue this week, which is what's happening with organized labor in California. I think we could call this the summer of strikes, right? We got the actor strike, we got the writer strike, we have the hotel workers strike, we got UPS workers on strike, we got the SEIU on strike. Everybody's on strike. There's a strike for everybody. What's going on here?
Well, I've heard it called hot liberal summer, and the driver behind it is an economic driver, which is that a middle-class job is no longer providing a middle-class life, particularly in places like LA and San Francisco. The cost of housing, in particular, is making it just unaffordable for people to be able to live decently, even and especially if they're working full-time. And so labor's pushing back to try to use the tight market to drive more earning power for their members.
Think of this as the post-COVID season of strikes. A lot of these men and women were essential workers during the shutdown. And that allowed them to gain a level of public sympathy, but it also gave them a political opportunity as COVID has eased to come back and say, we were there for you. Now we want our share too.
Yeah. All right. Meanwhile, pretty good week for President Biden. If you look at what happened, the president met with NATO, which he really has helped to keep together and unified during Russia's assault on Ukraine. Meanwhile, the rise of inflation is easing, now headed down to 3%, down from 9%, which has been one of his biggest liabilities. Still, a majority of the country disapproves of the job he's doing. 42% approval, 53% disapproval. A majority still worried about his age. This in The Atlantic, Elliot Cohen writing this: step aside, Joe Biden. The president has no business running for office at 80. And Dan, isn't this a legitimate concern? I mean, is it a good idea to have a president in his mid-80s?
Well, I think what most Americans have decided is that it's not a good idea, but they're going to make that decision in the context of a comparison. Old joke about the two guys on the camping trip. The bear shows up. One of the guys starts to lace on his sneakers. His friend says, "What are you putting on sneakers for? You can't outrun that bear." And the guy says, "Yeah, but I can outrun you." That is essentially the Biden strategy against Trump. Make no mistake about it, Alex. Joe Biden is the only Democrat who can beat Donald Trump, but Donald Trump might be the only Republican who Joe Biden can beat. Because in the context of that comparison, Biden knows, he goes, I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be better than him.
But isn't this something, Brian, that Democrats behind the scenes, who all are unified and say everything great about Joe, are whispering behind the scenes, man, he's looking pretty old. I'm concerned. We're throwing a lot behind this guy. Kamala Harris, I don't know about her. This is a giant risk.
I'm not disagreeing with any of that, and it's not whispering.
Yeah.
It's a legitimate question. I mean, Joe Biden acknowledges that it's a legitimate question. I think it has been helpful that his answer to that question has moved from watch me to with age comes wisdom and experience and the ability to be effective. I think we saw that just this week. I don't know of any other president, Democrat or Republican, who could have kind of moved the chess pieces in a way to persuade the Turks to get the Swedes into NATO, to expand NATO, to push back against Russia. Domestically, you look at his record, every other president, Democrats and Republicans, has not lived up to what Biden has achieved, probably since LBJ. So I think he has an answer to the question, but he's going to have to answer it over and over.
Do you really believe what you just said, which is that,
yes,
that Trump Biden may be the only Democrat that can beat Trump? Do you not think that Gavin Newsom or Pete Buttigieg or Wes Moore or somebody else in the Democratic bench could beat Donald Trump?
What I should say is that Joe Biden would have the best chance of any Democrat of beating Donald Trump, because if you look at the difference between 2016 and 2020, Joe Biden was able to reach out to those working class voters in Rust Belt America and convince them to abandon Trump for his candidacy in a way that Hillary Clinton couldn't. And I think it's an open question whether any of the Democrats you mentioned have that same skill set. But what makes this even a greater challenge for Biden, Alex, and it's worth spending just a moment on, is the discomfort that many Democratic leaders have about Vice President Harris. Now, Biden is clearly running for re-election. He's made that announcement. He believes his health is sufficient. But keep this in mind. If he were to withdraw from the race in December, you would see a very competitive multi-candidate primary, the survivor of which would go on to be a very competitive general election candidate. If he withdraws next March or April, then Vice President Harris becomes the Democratic nominee. So I suggest to you that Joe Biden really has about 6 months to decide whether he's running for re-election or not. And that can't be an easy decision because he and his advisors understand the stakes involved of what happens if he steps down too late.
Well, and at that age, health could be an issue at any point.
Precisely.
Right, including when you're talking about. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about the Republicans. President Trump really seems to be going his own way, so not following the crowd. His numbers continue to rise. Can anybody beat him? We'll talk about that and more. You're watching The Issue Is.
Do you really believe what you said?
Here is the latest Real Clear Politics average of polls among Republican voters nationwide. Donald Trump with 53% support. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis with 21%. Former VP Mike Pence at 6%. Trump slamming DeSantis in Iowa.
He's got no personality. You probably found that out because his polls are crashing.
Back with our panel, political analyst Brian Goldsmith and Dan Schnur. Their polls are rising. So what's going on? Why is Trump just seem to be so dominant right now?
Well, he's the former president. You know, he has a very favorable view among Republican voters. You would expect him to be quite dominant. I'm a little bit contrarian on this. I think the national polls don't matter until after Iowa and New Hampshire. I think the whole campaign boils down to, can somebody beat Trump? Presumably, hopefully, the same person, because I'm rooting for Trump to lose in Iowa and New Hampshire. And then it's a real race. But if Trump wins those two states, it's over. He's the nominee.
But right now, the polls in both Iowa and New Hampshire show Trump up huge.
Well, so, Alex, it's going to sound like I'm changing the subject, but I'm not. Years and years ago, the former basketball player Dennis Rodman once said, he said, quote, "The only bad press is an obituary." And to me, that sums up Donald Trump's approach to politics.
And his approach to his life, right?
Which is, he knows that he would rather, and he wrote about this in Art of the Deal, he would rather achieve unfavorable coverage than no coverage, because at least then he can dominate the conversation. And in the Republican primary, he's dominating the conversation to a degree that no other candidate has a chance to be heard. And one or more of them, other than Chris Christie, are going to have to figure out how harsh they're willing to go after him.
So Ron DeSantis was thought of by many as like the hope to take him on, and his launch hasn't been especially exciting for a lot of folks. What do you make of him, and why are his numbers not better?
I think DeSantis is making the same mistake that lots of big state governors make when they run for president, is they assume they can essentially run the same kind of campaign they ran in a large state on a national stage. And this is exactly what DeSantis is doing here. He's trying to run for the president of Florida. And in 49 other states, the voters don't find that to be nearly as enticing a message. What I would say is it's worth remembering that most of the other Republicans, until it was too late in 2016, most of the other Republicans laid off of Donald Trump because they wanted to be the last person standing other than him. So he never really had to fight a contested primary. And I would argue that if one or more of those candidates step forward, like I was saying earlier, I think you do see a contested race. As DeSantis flounders, so keep an eye on Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina. He's starting to attract more money. He's starting to attract more grassroots support in Iowa and New Hampshire. And if the maybe Trumpers in the Republican Party are looking for an alternative, he might be a little bit easier to bear than DeSantis has been so far.
This week, the Emmy nominations came out. We hope there'll be an Emmys with the strikes and everything else. But I'm curious for your take, best TV show right now.
Well, I would say two. One is Succession.
Yes.
Maybe the greatest show I've ever watched. But I also thought the last season of Mrs. Maisel was extraordinary.
What about you?
So all sorts of talk about Succession, about Mrs. Maisel, about Barry, even about Ted Lasso, which I think fell off a little bit this year, although for the record, I want to grow up and be Roy Kent. The sleeper this year was Shrinking.
Oh, so good.
Jason Segel, Jessica Williams, and best of all, Harrison
Ford.
When I was a kid, I wanted to be Han Solo in Indiana Jones. Now I want to be that grouchy, curmudgeonly Harrison Ford character.
You're on your way.
He's my idol.
I just want to see you as Roy Kent. That sounds interesting. All right. I mean, honorable mention for Better Call Saul, which I think was outrageously great this year, but Succession. And the third episode of Succession this season was not only the best episode of TV this year, but one of the great TV shows of all time.
And of course, the issue is.
Well, yeah, there we go. It's not best this year. That's okay. Succession led the pack with 27 nominations. We appreciate you both for coming in. We go to break with the theme song from Succession. We'll be right back. Doesn't this put you in a mood?
It does.
I mean, it's really something. Yeah.
That makes you want to yell, "Don't skip it!"
Very likely it would seem to have a actors strike. How is that going to impact things, and what are your expectations there?
Well, I think it's very disturbing to me. We've talked about disruptive forces on this business and all the challenges that we're facing and the recovery from COVID, which is ongoing. It's not completely back. This is the worst time in the world to add to that disruption.
What did you think about Bob Iger's comments yesterday?
I found them terribly repugnant and out of touch, positively tone deaf. And, I don't think it served him well. If I were that company, I would lock him behind doors.
Variety's Elizabeth Wagmeister speaking there to Fran Drescher, the SAG-AFTRA president. She's just back from covering Hollywood's writers and actors being out on strike for the first time together since 1960, back when Ronald Reagan was running SAG-AFTRA. Elizabeth, welcome back to The Issue Is.
Thank you, Alex. I always love being with you.
So what did you learn being out there talking to the folks on the line?
If it wasn't clear, what I learned is that these actors, they will be striking until the end of time. People ask, how long is this going to take? How long can this go on? And I asked that question of many SAG-AFTRA members, and they all said, really, the ball is in the court of the AMPTP. We are out here. We are on the picket lines. We are fighting for our future. They are showing no signs of slowing down. And if we look at the WGA strike, if that's any indication, that's going on for longer than 2 months at this point already.
Well, and in that negotiation, they're not even negotiating. They're not even talking to each other.
They haven't gone back to the negotiating table since May 1st.
But, okay, so what is the main sticking point? What's this really about? Because a lot of people hear this, they'll say, all these rich actors, who cares about them? Tom Cruise without work, who cares? What's really going on here?
Okay, so first of all, when we say rich actors, that is the 0.01% of the 0.01% in Hollywood. When you are out there on the picket lines, where I just was earlier today, these are not rich actors. These are people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And then when you look at what this is about, strikes are usually all about money, right? This is about money, of course. They want their pay to be increased. It's also about protection in the streaming world and with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, this idea that people could basically replace by machines. This is something the writers are looking at. This is something a lot of industries are going to be looking at. We're sort of at this inflection point when it comes to artificial intelligence. What do the actors want?
They are telling us that when they were in the negotiating room, that what the studio side wants is to be able to have an extra come in for 1 day, and a day rate under the SAG contract is around $200. They want to be able to scan their face. They work 1 day, and then they could use their likeness and their image in perpetuity. So that means that you are getting paid around $200 for a few hours of work, but then you show up in the background everywhere. So that is a really scary reality, and that's what the actors say that they are fighting against.
So the question, you talked a little bit about how does this end. Could there be more pressure from other folks to make it end? We talked about this today at an event in Hollywood that I was at. Here's some video of this, moderating a State of the State event for the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. This issue really top of mind. Here's what State Senator Ben Allen, who represents part of Hollywood, had to say.
Governors in the past got involved when there was the slowdown at the ports. This could be so existential, to our region that I think we need that high-level attention.
Suggesting that Governor Newsom potentially get involved, that possibly the president gets involved. Are there any external forces like that that could maybe bring these guys to actually get a deal done?
I mean, earlier this week, before the actors did go on strike, the studio side, the AMPTP, they brought in a federal mediator. Clearly, that didn't work because they're out there on the picket lines. You also have to look at the economy. If you look back at the writer's strike from 2007, 2008, that's just the writers, not the actors. That cost $2.1 billion. This isn't just paying the actors, it's not just paying the writers. You have the restaurant business with on-set catering. You have hotels. There are so many ancillary industries that are impacted by this. So there really are two sides to this story.
Yeah, and those folks maybe aren't unionized and aren't necessarily supportive of this because it's really hurting their own personal bottom line. Not to mention all the folks that kind of miss their entertainment and miss their shows.
Come the fall season, you will notice this because the broadcast shows typically go into production right around this time in the summer. They can't work. So that means that all of the network TV shows cannot go into production right now. On ABC, for example, they have lined up their whole fall schedule with all reality programming. So we'll probably see a lot of reality shows. we'll see reruns, but the streamers won't be hit as hard because they have this whole backlog and library of content.
Well, in September, the Emmys are supposed to air on Fox. It's looking unlikely that they will air on Fox. We got the Emmy nominations announced this week, which was another big story that's kind of getting lost in the shuffle of all of this. But I know there was one Emmy show that got special love that you wanted to shine a light on.
Yes. I love the show Jury Duty. It's on Amazon's Freevee. And if you haven't watched it, I don't want to give it away, but it's about a real trial that's actually a fake trial.
So basic premise of Jury Duty, one guy shows up for jury duty. He's there for real. Everybody else is an actor, and it's that premise. Also, we loved White Lotus season 2.
We both agree it got better in season 2.
It got better. We love Tanya. So we go to break with music from the White Lotus. Elizabeth, thank you. And we'll be back with more of The Issue Is after this. How great is this theme song, by the way?
It's the best.
Yeah.
It's the best.
We end this week with a Super Bowl champion back at home to pay it forward in a big way.
Juju Smith-Schuster's journey started as a 5-star recruit out of Long Beach Poly.
End zone, Smith-Schuster.
He'd win the Rose Bowl with the USC Trojans.
Super Bowl champion, man.
And just won the Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs, earning him an invite to meet the president and TikTok at the White House.
It's really cool. Got to meet Biden, which was a cool experience, and just hanging out with the guys and taking it all in.
As Juju prepares for next season with the New England Patriots, he's returning to where it all began.
Shout out to Long Beach Poly.
This week, he's back on Long Beach Poly's campus, working with kids and donating a new weight room via his Juju Smith-Schuster Foundation.
Not just working out with them, but teaching them about education. And my message to these guys is that, never forget where you come from.
Juju also hosting a video game camp in Orange County this weekend.
Do you let the kids win?
I mean, no, because when I'm playing with these kids, they know who I am, so I'm a big target.
Since 2019, Juju's foundation has served people all over the country. This year, I'm back emceeing his Trojan Legends Luau fundraiser, which features Polynesian music and food, plus a panel of USC greats on stage.
As we like to say at USC, thank you and fight on.
Fight on, baby.
To get involved yourself, head to jujufoundation.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, we leave you with Juju's moves at the White House.